Hello, a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Farah and I'm the Marketing and Communications Leader for Buildings London. And so to our speaker this morning. Born in Scotland and raised in Edinburgh, Alice was always interested in how things worked, or conversely, did not work. She says, despite her accent, she is most definitely Scottish. And had she been born a few hundred years ago, she would have been drowned in the Nor Loch as a result of her freckles, and she would have been deemed a witch. Poor Alice. Coming from a family of bankers and lawyers, she knew at least which career path she did not want to follow. She thinks she was inspired by the classic 80s Iron Brew adverts made in Scotland from girders. Alice saw a video of the Galloping Gertie Bridge collapse in Tacoma Narrows near San Francisco and thought this rather interesting. Naturally adept at sciences, she was also influenced by her physics teacher, and as such was more interested in things that could be made and were not supposed to move, hence her choice to be a structural engineer. Alice has worked at Arup from the age of 17, initially as a gap year placement student, and was subsequently sponsored by the firm for her engineering degree at Cambridge. At Arup, Alice has worked on a plethora of, and it has to be said, amazing projects, including Chiswick Park, Globe Academy, Crossrail, Rock on Top of Another Rock, and other sculptures including the Timber Wave, and currently is working for Claridge's. Her most favourite project is the V&A Exhibition Road Quarter, as most of you will know, opened late last year. She says that it was technically challenging, had a great team of people, and that the fact that it gives the public such great value. So without further ado, I'm really happy to introduce the wonderfully talented and self-deprecating Alice Blair.
Thank you, Farah. Good morning, everybody. As I started to think about my talk, I reflected on one of the definitions of structural engineering, the start of which says it's about the science and art of designing and making. With this in mind, I would like to delve into, as we shape and influence the built environment, do we truly seek to explain the value of what we are doing and creating for society? Let's start with a few numbers. Last month, the Royal Statistical Society released their UK Statistic of the Year 2017. The statistic was 0.13%, and this is the proportion of land area in the UK which is densely built up. This is defined as an area where 80% of the land is covered by artificial surfaces, such as all types of buildings, transport networks, including roads, car parks, things like that. A few weeks later, a friend of mine, and this is someone who knows how much I love concrete, sent me a link to an article on the BBC News website called The Illusion of a Concrete Britain. Ooh. But what I read was a little bit different to what I expected from the title. The illusion referred to is the public's distorted perception of how built up our country is. As the pollsters Ipsos Mori asked the British public what percentage of land in the UK they think is densely built up, the findings showed the public hugely overestimate the figure, with a mean guess of 47.4%. So the public thinks that 47% of the country is densely built up, whereas actually only 0.13% is. In fairness, the total area of the built environment, encompassing buildings, roads, airports, bridges, etc., comes to 6.62% of the UK. This is still a long way short of the public perception. I was fascinated by both the numbers themselves and the differences between them, and why there is this seemingly massive disconnect between the public perception of the built environment and what it actually is. And perhaps by the unvoiced implication that maybe the public feels that the UK is too built up. And I guess this is where the hypothesis of my talk starts to take course. And with these statistics and the public perception in mind, I would like to question As the nature of what we build and where we build it is changing, are we doing enough to show that what we are doing is for the greater good of society? Perhaps some of the public misconception is because there are areas of the UK which, of course, are totally built up. For example, today, here we are in a corner of Fitzrovia on the edge of the London Borough of Camden. 18.3% of Camden is densely built up, and 83.8% of it is built up in total. In the City of London, it's more extreme, with 97.6% densely built up. Pockets of green, such as the gardens in the Barbican, don't even feature. And only the lovely Inner Temple Gardens are deemed large enough to break up the density in one tiny area. Seeing these figures for areas where land values are so high, and some of the most well-known developments in the UK are based, perhaps that public perception is a lot more understandable. London, of course, has a long history of mega and pioneering construction projects, particularly in the world of civil engineering. Some were more obvious, disruptive, and influential than others. As we take a look to the past, the construction of the Thames Tunnel between Rotherhithe and Wapping was completed in 1843. This was an engineering marvel, the first tunnel constructed under a navigable river anywhere in the world. And its engineers, father and son team, Mark and Isambard Kingdom Brunel, became amongst the most famous civil engineers in history. However, the Thames Tunnel took 18 years to build, with delays due to collapses, flooding, and funding running out, with costs escalating way beyond the initial estimate. During its construction, it was a running joke. I'd like to think this isn't the norm nowadays, though I'm sure we can all think of exceptions. When the Thames Tunnel was finally completed, it was never used for horse-drawn carriages as intended, as they ran out of money to construct the ramps to take these down to the tunnel. Instead, it became a tourist attraction, with 2 million visitors a year on foot, each paying a penny. To put these numbers into context, the entire population of London at the time was only slightly higher. Though quite why they visited is a good question. The American writer Nathaniel Hawthorne said of the tunnel, "It consisted of an arched corridor of apparently interminable length, gloomily lighted with jets of gas at regular intervals. There are people who spend their lives there, seldom or never, I presume, seeing any daylight, except perhaps a little in the morning. All along the extent of this corridor, in little alcoves, there are stalls of shops, kept principally by women, who, as you approach, are seen through the dusk offering for sale multifarious trumpery." He said, "So far as any present use is concerned, the tunnel is an entire failure." Fortunately, in the late 1860s, the Thames Tunnel was transformed into a railway tunnel, and now that's part of the London Overground. So not a failure as it turns out. Today, 190 million passengers per year use that line. Still on my pet subject of the development of the London Underground, let's move a few miles northwest and let's go back a few years to the 1850s. Today, it's hard to imagine just how ambitious a project the Metropolitan line construction was. This was the first underground railway anywhere in the world. The Metropolitan line was built cut and cover under some of London's busiest streets. People would have been able to see exactly what was going on from buildings on either side. The disruption during construction must have been a nightmare. In 1885, after the inner circle, effectively today's Circle Line, was completed, John Fowler, the chief engineer of the Metropolitan line, said something that absolutely still holds true today. He said, "Tunnels through a town crowded with buildings must always be anxious works. Covered ways might be exceedingly simple constructions when the ground was favourable and the buildings not too near, as in the case of ground cleared for a new street. Or they might be works of the greatest difficulty when important buildings on each side of a street had to be upheld and the street traffic maintained without interruption." He also said something that really struck me. After the contract was let and the works had been commenced on the first section of the line, great public and professional interest was felt in the undertaking, but at the same time it was considered to be an experiment. At the monthly board meetings of the directors, he was often told that members of the board had been warned by engineers that the line could never be made, that even if made, it could never be worked, and even if worked, that no one would travel by it. He said this was rather discouraging, but he had studied the work carefully and believed in it, and the directors believed in him, and he did make it, did work it, and the public travelled by it. That was quite a statement. Albeit with the benefit of hindsight, the chief engineer was publicly admitting how much doubt there had been at the outset of the project, but that his client had gone ahead anyway. I was, and I still am, impressed by the sheer audacity and nerve of these pioneering civil engineers of Victorian times. What they were proposing was so outrageous and experimental. The stakes were very high, and public knowledge in their endeavours was equally as high. And they had no certainty that the public would actually make use of their creations at the end of the process. These brave engineers made a huge leap of faith about the value of what they were doing. With the Metropolitan line, the success of the engineering project was immediate, but it took over 20 years for the value of the Thames Tunnel to be realised. And the influence of both of these projects over the past 150 years has been immense. We can see how London developed because of these key pieces of infrastructure, and a quick Google can tell me the passenger numbers, one convenient metric of value. In the world of buildings, it can be harder to define value. The wider benefits and value to society can be less evident, not prioritised, or simply not known. I would argue they are no less important. We define so much of construction in terms of cost. It's convenient and is something we can understand and can measure. I can say to my colleagues, we have an X million pound project, and my colleague will immediately get a sense of the scale of the project and the potential value to our business. And we can quantify our entire industry in the same way. Or I can say to my client, oh, look, I've saved you Y £1,000, and my client will hopefully be immediately grateful. I question, what does cost have to do with value? For the cost of a contract only really has value to the contractor. In its widest sense, value is a personal matter, not an objective fact. Einstein reminded himself of this every day. He was said to have had a sign in his office which read, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." The Constructing Excellence in the Built Environment report, Be Valuable, a guide to creating value in the built environment, goes somewhat further. It says, the subjectivity of value is a key point. It implies that to state the value of anything, we have to know who is judging, and in a multi-stakeholder situation, what will determine the balance of view. Built environment matters are highly diverse in their stakeholding pattern, with situations offering different value to each party. Going beyond synonyms for value, it can be usefully defined as the balance between what you get and what you give. Positive value exists for any player when they get more in their own terms than they must give up. And negative value exists when sacrifices exceed benefits. We can also say that positive balance creates value and negative balance destroys it. Unless we can understand what value our work brings, and not just to our clients, how can we really understand if we're serving the greater good? When we talk about adding value, what are we adding it to? In March 2017, the Centre for London published a collection of essays entitled Making Good, Shaping Places for People. And I would like to share with you today a few aspects which particularly resonated with me. Daisy Froud suggests that the current planning system has been largely unchanged since it came into being in 1947 in terms of who takes decisions and how. She says one might even argue that compared to 1947, the democratic power of the public interest has been reduced within spatial decision-making. And yet, while this endures, and while participation in traditional representative democracy may have dropped, the British public is better educated, less deferential, more demanding, and exposed to a broader range of cultural influences. The 2006 Joseph Rowntree Trust Power Inquiry reported that when participation meets the expectations of today's citizen, those citizens will get involved. If those of us who govern truly want to represent the interests of all of the rest of us, then there is no excuse not to get on with it and to draw on the intelligent models we have for inspiration. Ewan Mills suggests that, with some exceptions, the planning process is mostly still very analogue, involving boxes of printed drawings and supporting documents. And decisions are made on a case-by-case basis, he says, with a haphazard understanding of the cumulative impact of the hundreds, if not thousands, of other developments that go through the planning department every year. And I'm sure we've all been in a situation where the first you know about a local development is seeing an ambiguously worded A4 piece of paper fixed to a lamppost. I present to you Exhibit A, the intriguingly titled Installation of Public Artwork Through Minor Alterations to External Facades of the Building. Going back to Ewan Mills, he says that the opportunities presented by new technology can radically change how we build our urban environments. We can now create tools that allow us to monitor and understand what makes good quality spaces faster and better than we ever could. He says our policies can be less ambiguous and can also be designed to be regularly adjusted based on outcomes. Decision-making can be fully inclusive and accountable. As professionals, and especially for those of us involved in the design process, we are benefiting from amazing digital technologies such as 3D modelling, BIM, GIS, augmented reality. These help us collaborate and communicate with our team members. We do sometimes hoard some of the best features available, and we default to 2D output a lot of the time. In doing so, we hide some of the tools that enable us to better understand, and this can make it even harder for outsiders to catch up. Ewan Mills also goes on to make the point, and he's not the first to say this, about the use of big data and how this can feed back to improve designs and decision-making. As buildings become smarter and increasing amounts of data become available, we can learn about society indirectly and objectively by measuring physical and emotional responses to the built environment. Buildings can tell us what is valuable. Alan Penn discusses the concept of placemaking, which is about making meaningful urban spaces to make the world intelligible and creating the conditions in which we can act purposefully as members of society. In London, he says, there is a huge ambiguity about which values and whose interests are driving London's evolution. He says there is a notable vagueness about this in documents such as the 2016 London Plan, the capital's current overarching spatial strategy. It states repeatedly, for example, the objective of meeting the needs and aspirations of all Londoners. At the same time, it presents economic growth as a primary objective. So, two assumptions appear implicit here. Firstly, that those aims are compatible, and secondly, that there is no positive alternative to growth. Both could be challenged, he says. Indeed, the latest draft London Plan, out for consultation at the moment, states that London's global economy is the envy of other world cities, and with good reason. It is the engine of the national economy and will sustain the level of population growth expected in London over the coming years. But to plan a city that works for all Londoners, as the population grows towards 10.8 million by 2041, it will be important to think about what the purpose of economic growth actually is. As I bring my thinking to a close, I would like to bring some more personal perspectives on this topic. During construction nowadays, things are often hidden away. Sometimes this is a deliberate and conscious choice for reasons of confidentiality, or if there is a fear of a negative reaction. Or there may be sensible reasons such as limiting dust, minimising disruption, or protecting the building materials from damage. Put all together, though, it does make it harder for outsiders to know what's happening. Transparency should be a good thing. When I worked on Chiswick Park several years ago now, there was a policy of having transparent site hoardings, which I've not come across before or since. I used to love how several times a week you would see buggies parked up against the site hoarding so that their little occupants could watch the show. There was a natural and delightful curiosity to see what was happening. My colleague Farah knows that in the world of basements has been my domain for the last few years, with major projects such as the V&A and Claridge's. Hence her suggestion for the quirky title of the talk, Going Underground. And Farah doesn't know this, but Going Underground by the Jam was actually the UK #1 when I was born. All those hours Farah spent plugged into her Walkman and memorising the Jam song lyrics from Smash Hits magazine clearly left an indelible mark. And the public wants what the public gets, but I don't get what this society wants. I'm going underground, going underground. Anyway. Anyway, basements are challenging. There can be high levels of uncertainty, lots of interfaces with third parties, technical, legal, logistical. Sequence is everything. And basements are, by their very nature, expensive. And that's when they go well. I was immersed on the V&A Exhibition Road Quarter project for over 6 years. Reflecting back since its opening last summer, with a client such as the V&A, we were lucky to have a building project that will serve the public for decades to come. Our client knows this, and we know this, as we all benefit. The value of what we were doing was always clear, and this alignment of the team's understanding of the value with our own technical objectives led to a fantastic project to work on. Yes, full of challenges. Importantly, though, also full of passion, a genuine shared aim to do the best we could. In the world of buildings, these sorts of public projects are rare and should be treasured. Without the public usefulness, this building would merely have been another new but hidden space, without a facade in the traditional sense, and almost entirely buried underground. Understandably, this would have been a much less interesting and less motivating project to work on. The V&A itself, meanwhile, is living up to its status as a world-leading museum of design and has produced some great videos on social media to reveal the design and construction process of its new extension to everyone. Altogether, this really is adding value and public benefit. Yes, we've created new floor space without going taller, and we've not built on greenfield land. Equally as importantly, we've created a new, pleasant and cultural space for us all to enjoy, and we know it. At the V&A, the public benefit is obvious. More recently, I worked on a project that would involve structural strengthening of some existing residential buildings. As the project went on, I came to realise that defining the outcomes of our work in terms such as extending the building life or meeting modern codes and standards was missing an important point. What we were aiming to achieve also needed to be evaluated in rather different terms. Would the community spirit and its value be preserved, enhanced, continued, or conversely destroyed? For me, this was a very salutary and, I must admit, surprising lesson. Another project which brought me, and I think others, much joy was the sculpture Rock on Top of Another Rock, which had a mere 18-month existence outside the Serpentine Gallery in Kensington Gardens. Consisting of two 30-ton granite boulders, one balanced on top of the other, to form a really simple and really cool sculpture. This was a project where the act of doing the balancing, i.e. the engineering bit, is where all of the value lay. Without the engineering, it was completely useless. With the engineering, the magic happened, and suddenly two rocks had artistic value. And the better the engineering, the higher the value. One of my colleagues, you know who you are, said to me they thought this was the best project we've done in the last few years. I can't honestly say I agree with that, but what I can easily understand is there's something tantalising to those of us self-deprecating engineers about a simple project, well executed, where the value is so blatantly in the engineering. Rock on top of another rock was something that had no functional purpose whatsoever. Yet it effortlessly brought that sometimes elusive quality, delight. It was fun. Perhaps it was everything that the Thames Tunnel was not. Short-lived, a deliberate tourist attraction, functionally useless, incredibly simple, exciting, quick, and unapologetic. What I've realised is that for me, the more obvious the value of what we are doing, the more satisfying and easier it is. There is value everywhere. It's just that often we have to work hard to question and understand what value is and what it means. It's not always instinctive, and we can't always measure it. And thinking about wider societal value, I question whether we currently truly understand how to optimise our designs to maximise value. And I think our designs, our product, our built environment will be better if we find ways to grasp this more effectively. To sum up, I believe we can look to other inspiring influences that form and shape our world, such as Nobel Prize winners who pioneered and persevered against all odds, or to the great artists of the past, many of whom were never really appreciated for their stunning works of art and amazing ideas until long after they'd died. We all appreciate the value these great minds have brought to the well-being of our society. Moving on to the world of buildings and our built environment, will the new cancer centre at Guy's ultimately enable this disease to be so reduced? And will that be a result of the beautifully designed and engineered spaces which improve the well-being of people, patients and staff alike? Or indeed the Francis Crick Institute with its awe-inspiring spaces? Will this be the new home for the next world-famous scientists to pioneer their new ideas? Or indeed my contribution to the Exhibition Road Quarter? Will this new cultural icon for London continue the didactic tradition of the V&A, where the buildings themselves seek to inspire? I leave you with this thought. Value is of course subjective, and yet I believe we should all talk about this elusive word and question what it means for all of society. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Isn't a lot of what we're talking about actually down just to education? Most people, especially in London, when you see people walking around, they never look, well nowadays above their iPad or their phone, but they don't look above street level. So they don't see the beautiful architecture, they don't see all the work that's gone in, that's all around them. When you talk about value, a lot of the value in the architecture is the visual effect it has on the community. And yet 99% of you couldn't, in fact all of you I would say, couldn't tell me the colour of the building that we're in now. Because we walk up the stairs, we walk in the door and that's it. So if we educate people to actually look and see what's about them, the buildings, the events, the projects, the value is much greater to the community.
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah. I think it's getting the information out there, but also kind of competing in this world where there is so much information. I think that's a big challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any idea of how built up Britain is compared to other countries? Are we more built up relative to others, or?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that.
I just thought that might be an interesting comparison as to why we think things that aren't real. You know.
It is interesting, isn't it? I mean, 0.13% is almost negligible, isn't it? I mean, maybe it's because actually you can kind of see the influence of the built environment extends beyond the built environment, so maybe people just sort of feel that it's more pervasive than it really is. But
because it's all quite sprawling and what, but maybe not as densely as we think.
I mean, I asked, when I saw those statistics, because I read the article and then I found the statistics, and so I was sort of asking myself that question, how built up did I think the UK was? And I also massively overestimated it. I wouldn't have said nearly half, but I might have said 15, 20%. But it's completely wrong, as it turns out, yeah.
I would like to add that Britain's ecological footprint despite of little build-up. The resources need for water, clean water, food and forests, it's almost twice as we've got.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, yes, just as well we haven't built up any more than 0.13%.
I thought Alice was brilliant. She was passionate about what she did. She didn't make it boring, and it could have been a very, very dry subject. But she made it interesting. It was a twist in the tale, the going underground. You expected it to be about the underground system, the development at Holborn Station, things like that, and it wasn't. It was far more general. It talked about the history of London and its development, which was wonderful. It showed it in modern context and modern time. So you saw from the Wapping Tunnel, which I might have been on, but I don't know it. And it showed how history actually never stops and starts. It's continuous. The development is continuous. I like the fact that she was talking about the usage, the public misconception about the amount of land that is used. That's because we live in the developed part, so we only see the developed part, and we think everything is developed, and of course it isn't. An interesting question at the end about how England compares to other countries in development percentages. But I thought she was a brilliant speaker, and I look forward to coming back for another one.
I think it was classic, good quality Arab talk. It was intellectual, very philosophical. I thought it was fantastic. I think it's right to look at value. I think value in different sectors is a difficult topic. Values in some of the things that she's been working on, V&A particularly. I think it's much easier to quantify value, and some of the interesting statistics around the transportation, quantifiable. I think in the commercial world, much more difficult. I guess you can look at things, recent planning things about putting public spaces in buildings, which is sort of adding value to spaces. But ultimately, I think she hit it bang on when she talked about who was judging the value. And I think in the commercial world, which we all have to work in, I think the value is the occupier. And I think that's difficult to get a value from the occupier. They're working away, and it somehow equates to productivity, which is very poorly measured at the minute, I think. So I think it's a big question, and I think it's difficult to answer, but she did a terrific job.
So the talk was very inspiring. It was from different point of view, with different scale on project, and for me as architect, is the value added to a project is how you define that, and it's more the value is what will make the project different, what people will feel when they enter a building or when they enter a construction. So basically it's just like pushing the boundaries and not staying where you are, and the evaluation of this project will make the difference.
I thought it's really different and outside the box, and it just made you think in a different way. And so many things we tend to, suppose, take for granted. So I thought it was quite interesting to see the different aspects of the disciplines of. I think it'd be a good idea on my next project to get all the different disciplines, the architect, consultants and main subcontractors, and actually have a little discussion on that from the start of the job. Just to sort of, everyone thinks something different, don't they? They have got different ideas. So yes, I thought it was really interesting, and I'm looking forward to the next one.